Our final speaker now is Daniel Birch. I'd like to invite Daniel up. Daniel grew up on a family farm east of Karoo and entered the ag industry again 5 years ago as a farmer after studying and working in the mining industry. Daniel's current roles in the farm include operations and business management in their continuous cropping enterprise of wheat, canola and lupins in the medium rainfall zone. Outside of farming, Daniel is a member of the Legumes Group R&D Committee and the GRDC Geraldton Zone Grower Network, both of which have given him a broad insight into agronomy and broadacre cropping R&D. And it's also given him the opportunity to contribute back to the industry as well. So today, Daniel will speak about their farming operation and how they're focused on lupins in the crop rotation as part of their long-term strategy. Cool. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Nathan. So first of all, apologies for my dodgy looking profile picture in the guide today. When I searched through my phone to try and find a selfie, I had lots of photos of crops and broken down machines and the circus at home, which is my young kids, but obviously missed the selfie generation. Not quite as professional as the rest of my panel today. So to give a bit of context, I farm 25 kilometres east of Karoo, north and south of Karoo Latham Road, kind of on the eastern fringe of Waddy Forest and Marchagee area. So this is a picture of probably a typical soil type for us. Our farm is split about 40% yellow sandplain, 40% medium country, which might be like a sandy loam into some York gum loam, and then about 20% heavier salmon gum clay type stuff as well. How do I work this thing, Nathan? Topman? All right, thank you. So I was asked to speak about legumes in rotation today. So our legume of choice is lupins, being predominantly sandplain and medium country. So our lupin paddock choices are based on soil type. So we do target our sandplain and our sandy loams for our lupins. So that might mean only kind of somewhere between 60 and 70% of our farm sees lupins in the rotation. The remainder of the farm is put to canola and wheat. So 100% cropping, no livestock, which is very typical east of the line, as you'd be aware. So what that means is that we do have a portion of our farm, maybe 30%, which doesn't see legumes in the rotation. And we're open to trialing some different legumes and keeping an open mind about what we can use for that component of the farm. We've had lupin variety trials on the farm through AGT breeding since they took the breeding program over a few years back. So that's been interesting, and also some local variety trials around different types of legumes like field peas and chickpeas to test that on the heavier country and see how those perform. But I'd certainly have a lot to learn in that space before we jumped in head first. So 15% average is our lupins, and that fluctuates a little bit, which I'll have a chat about. And following our lupins in rotation, we generally look to apply lime sand, and we put gypsum out with our lime sand as well. And then we look to deep rip as well following the lupins, because we find we get a bigger benefit in the yellow sandplain from deep ripping leading into cereal and then canola phase after that. So the general rotation is usually wheat, lupins, wheat, canola, and then parts of the farm are getting 2 wheats in a row, but we try to target nothing more than 2 wheats in a row if we can help it for good break management. So I've only got a couple of slides from here. The first one is the advantages that we find from lupins and more broadly legumes in the rotation, and then some disadvantages as well, some of which have been spoken about today. So they are a very critical part of our rotation to act as a break crop. They provide a disease break between the cereal crop before and after lupins. Different chemicals and mode of actions that we can use. This is becoming challenging at the moment with some of the chemicals like FOPs and DIMs for grass control in the lupins, which aren't working, well, are increasingly working less and less year on year. I'll touch on that when we get to the negatives. But for the moment, we are able to achieve reasonable weed control by sticking to this process of having a break crop every second or third year at the most. And the nitrogen supply is massive as well, to carry on from what David was explaining just before. So we've done soil testing before and after summer rain, and we've found that after a reasonable summer rain event, so 40, 50 millimeters plus, and then some time for mineralization to occur, we've proven that we see about 50, maybe 45 to 55 units of nitrogen becoming available following a lupin crop. I don't have exact figures to quantify year 2 and year 3, but anecdotally, there's certainly nitrogen available for those cereal crops and canola crops into year 2 and year 3. Our best wheat crops year in, year out, forever, with my parents growing lupins for 30 or 40 years, or however long they've been farming, a long time. The best wheat crops year in, year out are always the wheat crops on lupin stubble. They're never wanting for nitrogen, that's for sure. So in a year like this, if we take a urea price of $1,300 per tonne, we're sitting at about $2.80 per kilo of nitrogen. So very expensive compared to kind of start of 2021, we're like looking at about 1.5 times the price. So we factor that into the benefit that lupins are providing us, and that works out at about $141 a hectare. So it is significant. The other benefit as well, on a season like 2022, we were sitting decile 3 rainfall 3.5 weeks ago. So looking very poor. Wheat was dropping tillers, canola were dropping flowers, everything was wilting and falling over. We were living on the end of March still, hadn't had more than 10 millimeters since the end of March through our area and heading north a little bit. Last 3.5 weeks, we've gone from decile 3 to about decile 6. It's been an incredible turnaround, but that's meant it's made it very challenging to catch up on that nitrogen deficiency. So while we were busy trying to put out a little bit of late UAN, we probably haven't caught up to where we would have if we knew we were heading in this direction. And sure enough, we didn't give any late end to the wheat and even second year canola on lupin stubble. And those crops are the greenest we've got and looking really good. So there's good flexibility there as well. And another advantage, which is significant, is for on-farm storage, because lupins are hard-shelled. They don't need aeration. They don't need fumigation. So they're easy to store for long periods of time, and means that we can turn around from paddock to silo reasonably quick on the farm. And then it gives us good flexibility throughout the year to try and find some markets, either domestically or internationally, to sell into and try and achieve a little bit higher margin. So the disadvantage of lupins and a lot of legumes by association, the pricing has been fairly static because they're geared to animal nutrition, the feed market. It's a highly substitutional market, and therefore, we've seen prices somewhere around 300 to, it did peak at 550 halfway through 2018, halfway through 2019, somewhere around there. But generally it's been static 350 to 420 type thing, which makes it very hard to compete on a dollar per hectare margin basis with wheat and canola, especially in the last year. Hence we've seen in our region a lot of lupins dropping out, and the countryside's yellow now. So they're more sensitive to seasonal extremities, not as bad as canola when they're planted on the right type of country for lupins. We do take a bit of a punt on lupins and try and spread them around on some country which aren't really suitable to lupins year on year without putting too many hectares in, just to try and achieve those benefits of the break crop. But they're not tough as boots like wheat. So it does make it tricky when you're trying to pick them up off the ground in those really dry years. Relatively less generic gains compared to canola and cereals, like how many NVTs and NVT information do you have? And there's new varieties coming out every single year from every breeder of canola and wheat. Lupins is pretty static. Like we've been growing durians for about 8 years now. We find they've got better top end. We tried coyote for 1 year. It wasn't far off, but we only wanted to stick with one type. Durians certainly have a tendency to split seed, so they seem to need a lot more manganese than other lupin varieties. So because as far as I'm aware, around 70 or 80% of the world's sweet white lupin are grown in WA. There's probably less money and less groups to be putting into genetic advancement. So it's encouraging to see AGT pick up that recently, and having spoken to the guys on our farm over the last year or two, it seems that they're getting pretty close to hopefully having some good improved yields, where we'll see some percentage improvements similar to what we've seen with some of the more popular wheat varieties like Mace through to Scepter, where we're looking at 2 to 6% and that sort of thing. So some points around what we would like to see as legume growers to maybe help us improve our percentage planted areas, and probably for the rest of the growers as well in our area. Market awareness and demand as a food ingredient. So Richard touched on this earlier around improving the processing options within WA for pulses. There are certainly some groups out there at the moment, some mostly private enterprises, looking to use processed lupins for human food consumption, both as an ingredient and then also as a ready-to-eat snack food. So we see this as a really great opportunity to try and increase the market for lupins, teach the benefits and therefore increase the price is the end goal. So they become more competitive against the other grains that we're growing. The genetic yield improvements that I've discussed, that will certainly be handy to try and get those incremental gains. Disease resistance as well is an important one, which comes in as part of the genetic yield improvements. Sclerotinia has become an issue more in these couple of wet years, the last 2 years, more than what we have seen before or expected, I guess. So we're just keeping an eye on that. And the herbicide package is a big one too. At the end of the day, the lupins for us are a break crop, and one of their greatest benefits is controlling the weeds, for us mainly being ryegrass and radish. So then we can grow a clean wheat crop the following year and manage that seed bank. Clethodim seems to be working less and less every year. We need to be smarter about the timing of application, and without disclosing too much about off-label use, like a concern that I have is the clethodim rates that we're being advised to use or that we need to use to counteract resistance and seasonal conditions has gone so far off label, it's becoming ridiculous. So I wonder where the labels are going to catch up. And there's examples north of us in really common lupin growing country heading north into the sandplain areas, about like two timings of high clethodim rates, like an early and a late timing. And just this year we've sent some grasses away that were a bit later on than what we would have liked, and the clethodim took a long time to work or didn't work as well as what we wanted. So we've sent them away for quick testing to try and understand on these long-term lupin sites where we're sitting with clethodim how suitable it's going to be moving forward and what other options we have. So yeah, definitely in need for either some new herbicides for grass control in lupins or rethinking the way we're using it. Shattering's a problem as well. We don't have sheep in our rotation. If you did, it would be a good, supplementary grazing source. But for us, they just become a weed. So knocking out volunteer lupins is a pain all season. So the harvest loss testing that we've conducted kind of points towards 5 and 15% losses, which is really significant. Last year were high yielding lupins, and like if you're looking at, say, a 2+ ton lupin crop, 10% is really significant at 200 kilos a hectare, and they just keep coming back all year and growing, and you have to keep dealing with them. So yeah, shatter tolerance is going to be important. We do what we can to reduce that, but it comes at a cost with productivity as well. If you're shutting down your harvesters in the hot parts of the day between midday and 5 p.m, then yeah, makes it hard to be finished in a reasonable time. And the alkaloids as well. I think there's a lot more research to do. I've found and read as much as I can online. A lot of it's international, but if we're talking about using lupins for food consumption rather than just feed, the alkaloid level becomes really important. The Australian, New Zealand standard for human food consumption with lupins is 0.002 grams per kilo, or 2 ppm. Yep, something like that. And we, year in, year out, when we're doing alkaloid tests for some lupins that we use for feed consumption, we're kind of above and below that line, and we're trying to understand how seasonal conditions, how different soil types, timing of harvest, and a few other things interact with the alkaloid level. So yeah, low alkaloid, if we're looking towards human food consumption market expansion, will be critical, and we need to know more.